There are names you'll never find in a history book. People who, in a single moment, changed the entire course of a war. But they were buried by history, frozen under a layer of secrets no one wanted to uncover. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that's been concealed for over 80 years. A truth colder than a northern Russian winter, and more powerful than any myth. Her name was Olga Volkova, and this is her true story. When most people think of war, they picture the color red, of blood and fire. But in the Soviet North, the war was white. A cold, suffocating white that swallowed all sound and all hope. Olga Volkova was born in 1920 in a small village in Arkhangelsk, a place where winter lasted almost the entire year. She was a slender, quiet girl who said little, but silently watched the world with eyes as sharp as a blade. At just 10 years old, she went hunting in the forest with her father. With only an old rifle, her hands trembling in the cold, she hit a target nearly 80 yards away. It wasn't because she was strong. It was because she saw the world in a way no one else did. Before the storm broke, Olga was a physics student. She loved science, loved astronomy, and spent most of her time filling journals with notes about the night sky. If it hadn't been for the war, she would have become a researcher, not a dreaded figure on the battlefield. But war never asks if you're ready. One evening, Olga's village was bombed. She ran through the smoke and fire, calling for her parents, but was met only with silence. Not a single body, not a single trace. All that was left was snow and ash. Olga went to the recruitment station. She wasn't looking for revenge. She wanted only one thing: to make sure no one else would ever have to suffer what her family did. But the answer she got was, no, women aren't suited for combat. Olga didn't argue. She simply said, give me one chance, just one. They gave her a test that even many male soldiers failed. 5 moving targets in a bitter wind at 20 degrees below zero. The commander scoffed. Hit one, and I'll consider it. Olga didn't reply. Gunshots cracked through the air. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All hits. From that moment, Olga's life passed a point of no return. She became part of a secret unit, soldiers trained to be ghosts in the snow. No one knew it at the time, but this quiet girl from Arkhangelsk was about to become one of the deadliest snipers of her time. And this was only the beginning.
After that shocking display at the range, Olga Volkova wasn't sent back to her old unit. She, along with a few others, was put on a windowless truck. They drove for hours, deeper and deeper into the northern wilderness, to a place that wasn't on any military map. When the gate, which looked more like a rickety wooden fence than a military base, slammed shut behind them, the outside world vanished. This wasn't a barracks. It was a forge, hidden in the deepest, coldest pine forests. This place was almost completely cut off from the world. No mail, no contact. Its mission wasn't to train regular soldiers. It was to turn the most disciplined, most resilient human beings into silent shadows. They weren't making soldiers. They were making snipers, warriors who could change the entire battlefield with a single bullet. The very first day she stepped into the camp, Olga knew this wasn't going to be easy. The wooden common room reeked of stale sweat, damp pine, and cheap tobacco. There were 8 trainees in the unit. 6 of them were combat veterans, their faces etched with the grit of the trenches. One was a young, proud officer, fresh from graduation. And the last one was Olga. When she walked in, the conversation died. 6 heads turned. No one believed she could last. They didn't say it out loud. They didn't have to. It was in their eyes. Many soldiers in the camp, men who had seen war, thought letting a woman into this elite training was a bad joke, a joke that could get them all killed. The skeptical glances, the smirks, the whispers they thought she couldn't hear. Are they recruiting cooks now? But Olga didn't respond to anyone. She didn't argue. She didn't justify her presence. She just quietly observed, picked a bunk in the farthest corner, and silently wrote in the small notebook she'd carried with her since Archangelsk. It was that silence is what unnerved them the most. Training began at 4 a.m. the next morning. The instructor, a man with a face like granite and a voice like gravel under a boot, gathered them in the pre-dawn, bone-chilling cold. He didn't talk about patriotism. He didn't talk about glory. He only talked about the truth. This course doesn't keep the weak. His voice cut through the still air. Look around you, 8 of you. We aren't trying to graduate all 8. We only need 2. The rest of you are cut. You'll be sent back where you came from if you're lucky. The first drill wasn't shooting. It was a test of will. A cross-country run through knee-deep snow, carrying an 80-pound pack. The temperature? 25 below zero. Your breath froze before it could dissolve. Your lungs felt like they were inhaling broken glass. This wasn't a test of strength. Those other men, they were all stronger than Olga. This was a test of who would break first. The first few days, Olga was constantly exhausted. She was the smallest, physically the weakest. Every step was a war against her own body. Her calves screamed. Her back felt like it would snap. The other trainees passed her, leaving her in the snow. But she never stopped. When the other trainees stopped to lean against a tree, gasping and cursing, she kept going. When others complained about the cold, she was silent. And it was that silence, that almost absurd persistence, that made a few of them start to pay attention. They stopped scoffing. They started watching. The next phase of the course was marksmanship, but not on some comfortable covered firing range. No fixed distance, no support, no time limit. The instructor took them to a wind-battered valley. The wind howled through the rocks like a grieving spirit. The requirement: hit a target at 400 meters in a high wind. But that wasn't the hard part. Not once, not twice. You will do it over and over until every single bullet passes through the same hole. It was borderline impossible. The wind didn't just blow. It shifted. It attacked from every direction. Many lost their nerve. One veteran, a man who'd fought at Stalingrad, threw his rifle in the snow. It's impossible. The wind's too strong. Another cursed. One even asked to quit. But Olga was different. She didn't shoot. She lay down in the snow and she watched. For almost an hour, she didn't fire a single round. She just watched. She took out her notebook. The others thought she was crazy, but she was doing math. The physics student was at work. She analyzed the trajectory like a physics problem. She jotted down every change in the wind, the temperature, the humidity. Every gust became a variable in her equation. Then she calmly lay down and chambered around. She aimed with an absolute patience, a patience only understood by those raised in the quiet northern forests. Crack! 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 10 bullets, 10 breaths. And on the 12th day of training, Olga was the first to meet the requirement.
10 bullets, 1 hole. The instructor looked through the spotting scope, then looked at Olga. He didn't praise her. He just gave her a single nod. But in this world, that one nod was worth more than any medal. But a sniper isn't just about accuracy. What's more important? Making the enemy never know you were there. The camouflage training was the hardest part. They had to learn to become part of the earth, a rock, a snowdrift. They had to lie motionless for hours on end, in deep snow, in the freezing forest. The test was simple. The instructor would hunt you. "If I find you in 10 minutes," he said, "you fail. You pack your bags and you're gone." The other trainees, these big, tough men, usually lasted 5 or 6 minutes. They shivered from the cold. They couldn't control their breathing. Their breath plumed in the air. And that was all it took. The instructor would spot them, give them a boot to the ribs, and say, "Out." But Olga? She lay as still as the ground itself. She slowed her breathing until it was almost invisible. She let the snow cover her. She became the winter. On the 20th day of the course, the instructor hunted for her. He walked back and forth. He knew she was in the area. 10 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. He started getting frustrated. The other trainees, all eliminated, stood shivering and watching. For nearly 2 hours, the instructor searched for her. No one thought she was still there. They figured she'd given up and gone back to the barracks. But just as he turned his back to walk away, muttering about her failure, Olga opened her eyes. She was right behind him, 10 feet away. It was the first time in the camp that an instructor smiled at her. It was a terrifying smile, but it was a smile of respect. The final skill, and the hardest, psychological control. A sniper might wait an entire day, even multiple days for one shot. But when that moment comes, the heart is the first thing to betray you. A single racing heartbeat can pull a shot a yard off target at that distance. The instructors put them through high-stress drills. They set up giant speakers around the forest, blasting the chaotic sounds of battle. Machine gun fire from all directions, the screams of the wounded, artillery landing right next to them. And sometimes, worst of all, the terrifying silence of the forest, broken only by the relentless, soul-crushing howl of the wind. They had to learn to separate their mind from the noise, separate emotion from the body, separate fear from their own pulse. During those sessions, many of them broke. Even hardened veterans would shake, haunted by terrible memories. But Olga remained silent as always. She just focused on her breath, in and out, slow. No one knew what she was thinking, what she was fearing, or if she was trembling inside. They only knew one thing. No test had yet made her quit. By the 4th week, the attitude in the camp shifted. The looks of contempt were gone. The whispers stopped. In their place was caution. They gave her space. One trainee, the young officer, said later, "She never raised her voice, never acted tough, but when she picked up her rifle,
Everyone else just took half a step back. There was a terrifying stillness around her. The camp commander put it this way: "I've trained hundreds of snipers, but Olga's spirit, that ironclad, unbreakable will, I've only seen that in 3 people in my entire life." By the 6th week, the course entered its final exam, an unforgiving test. The 8 trainees were released into a remote forest. The mission? Infiltrate, track a target, their own instructors, take the shot with paint rounds, and escape without being detected. One mistake meant elimination. No second chances, no words of comfort. In that test, 5 of them were eliminated in the first 2 hours. They were too hasty, too loud. Only 3 passed. And Olga had the highest score. She didn't just tag her instructor. She ambushed him. She waited, not for an hour, for 8 hours, motionless, in the cold, until he made one tiny mistake. After 6 weeks of hell, a completely different Olga Volkova emerged. She was no longer the small physics student from Archangelis, no longer the girl trembling in the smoke and ash. In her place was a true sniper, a warrior who could vanish into the snow, appear where no one expected, and end a fight with a single bullet. But that brutal training was only the beginning, because starting next week, Olga was heading to the most brutal place on Earth, the front lines. Part 3 will be the moment Olga faces her first battle.
The day Olga graduated from that secret frozen hell was the day she received her first mission. There was no ceremony. There was no "congratulations, you survived." The instructor, that same man with a face like granite, simply handed her a folded piece of paper as she cleaned her rifle for the last time as a trainee. She unfolded the paper. It was stiff, cold to the touch. On it, just 2 brief, typed lines of military orders. Move to front 7, eliminate the target causing heavy casualties to the militia. That was it. No intel, no name, just a location and a task. The ride to the front was on the back of a rattling supply truck, its canvas top snapping violently in the wind. On the way there, Olga sensed the real war for the first time. It wasn't in the newsreels. It wasn't in the stories swapped back at the barracks. She sensed it, through its smell. It was a smell that clawed at the back of your throat, a thick, metallic, chemical smell of spent gunpowder and diesel, so heavy it felt like you could taste it. The smell of cold, raw metal from the artillery shells stacked like cordwood. And underneath all of that, another smell. The smell of unwashed bodies, of stale sweat, of fear. But the thing that haunted her most was the silence. This wasn't the clean, natural silence of the Arkhangelsk forests. This was a heavy silence, an unnatural silence. It was the silence of hundreds of men all holding their breath at the same time. A silence that pressed down on you, a physical weight on your chest. It was a silence so profound, so heavy with expectation, that every breath you took, every beat of your own heart, felt deafeningly, obscenely loud. It was the silence of a place that knew it was about to die. When she arrived, Front 7 wasn't a base. It was a series of deep, muddy, snow-filled ditches carved into the side of a hill. A collection of half-frozen, hollow-eyed men who looked more like statues than soldiers. She reported to the command bunker, a hole dug into the earth, roofed with logs that were slick with ice and mud. The commander told her the situation. His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. The unit had been losing, not just losing, but breaking, for 3 straight days. The reason was singular. One man. An enemy sniper hidden somewhere in the vast, snow-dusted forest that stretched out before them. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a ghost, a phantom who owned the entire valley. The commander pointed to the casualty list. This ghost had taken out over 10 soldiers in just 2 days. Experienced men, veterans. "He's toying with us," the commander said, his voice barely a whisper. "He doesn't shoot to kill all at once. He wounds one. He waits for the medic. He shoots the medic. He waits for the man who tries to pull the medic. He shoots him too. He's paralyzing them." The men in the trenches didn't move. They didn't eat. They didn't even relieve themselves. They just sat staring at the mud wall in front of them, waiting. Every time someone peeks, every time, the commander stressed, the bullet arrives before you even hear the sound. Think about it, the physics of it. It means the man next to you is alive 1 millisecond, and the next, he's just gone. A pink mist, and then a half-second later, you hear the crack of the rifle. It's terrifying. It's unnatural. It's like the laws of nature have been broken. No one had seen him. No one knew his position, but everyone knew he was watching them, right now. Olga was summoned into the tiny, candlelit command tent. The commander, a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, whose face was a roadmap of loss, didn't bother with pleasantries. He just looked at her. He saw the new rifle, the clean uniform, the youth. He almost looked away, as if in shame. He was about to send her to her death. He pointed a trembling finger at the crude map drawn on a piece of fabric. "Volkova, if you don't find him, we won't last the night. Morale is gone. They'll mutiny or they'll desert. He's broken us." He looked her dead in the eyes. Find him. There were no detailed maps of the enemy forest. There were no coordinates. There was no intel on her opponent, no spotter team, no support. Her only mission? Walk into that dark forest alone, find the ghost who was terrorizing the entire front, and eliminate him. Olga moved out of the trench, slipping over the back wall into the forest. She was alone. This was her first time truly alone in what the soldiers called the dead zone, a no man's land where every tree, every shadow, every single rock could be hiding a rifle aimed directly at her. The snow crunched under her boots, and the sound seemed to echo across the entire valley. She winced, stopping. She corrected her movement, shifting her weight from heel to toe, using the techniques they'd drilled into her for 6 weeks. She became a shadow. But inside, her heart was hammering. This wasn't training. This wasn't a test. This was real. But then something incredible happened.
The fear, it didn't vanish. It just focused. The student of physics took over. Her mind, instead of panicking, became crystal clear. She wasn't a terrified girl. She was a scientist, and this was just a problem to be solved. She began to analyze. She didn't look for the sniper. She looked for what the sniper would need. Cover, concealment, a clear line of sight, an escape route. She scanned the obvious spots, the ruined chimney of a farmhouse, the high branches of a massive pine. Nothing. Too obvious. This guy was good. She felt the wind on her cheek. She watched the way the snow drifted from the branches. Wind direction, sun's position, tracks in the snow, available firing lanes. She moved to where the last man had fallen, near the edge of their trench line. She looked at the impact hole the bullet had made in the wooden support. And then she saw it. She spotted the detail that everyone else in their fear had missed. The bullet had come from the angle of the main valley. That's where everyone was looking. That's where the fear was. But the impact, the way the bullet had splintered the wood, she looked at the wind. The wind in the valley was blowing left to right. To make this shot from the valley, the sniper would have had to aim left of the target, letting the wind drift the bullet back onto the target. But the bullet's entry, it told a different story. It had clearly been corrected for a wind blowing right to left. It was a contradiction. She traced the line of sight back, factoring in the wind she felt and the wind she knew would be different at a higher elevation, and her blood ran cold. It meant only one thing. The sniper wasn't in the valley.
The valley was a distraction. He was on the ridge, to the left, higher, a much more difficult, much smarter position. He was using the valley's echo to mask the true origin of his shot. He was a professional, and Olga had just found him. Now came the hard part. A duel between two masters of this craft is rarely a fast-paced gunfight. It's a battle of wits, a battle of patience, a battle of pure, raw, psychological endurance. It's a chess match where the first person to twitch loses. Olga moved, not toward him, but parallel. She spent 2 hours circling, moving through frozen gullies, using every dip and shadow until she was on a ridge that faced his. She found her spot, a small cluster of rocks covered in a snowdrift. She pressed herself into the snow. She chambered around, the click of the bolt sliding home sounding like a cannon in her ears. And she waited. She held her breath. She slowed her heart. She became part of the winter. The moment stretched out, from 1 minute to 10 to an hour. Her muscles screamed. The cold was so intense it was a physical pain, starting in her fingers and toes and creeping inward. She wanted to shiver. She needed to shiver. But she couldn't. She knew her opponent was doing the exact same thing. He was out there staring at her patch of woods just as she was staring at his. She knew one twitch, one shiver, one single millimeter of movement, and she would become the target. The sun began to dip, casting long blue shadows across the snow. And then, there, a tiny, tiny flash. Just a pinprick of unnatural light from a dense thicket of pine boughs.
It was gone in a fraction of a second. An icicle? A piece of quartz? The sun hitting a wet leaf? No. Her training screamed at her. It was scope glint. It was the sun, for 1,000th of a second, reflecting off the lands of her rival's scope. He had moved. He had made a mistake. Anyone else would have panicked. They would have fired wildly at the spot. But Olga didn't. She knew this was it. This was the one and only chance. He'd seen something, or he was getting impatient. He was scanning her position. He didn't know where she was, but he knew she was there. And now, she knew exactly where he was. Her mind went calm. The world narrowed to the small circle of her scope. She aimed, not at the flash, but at the dark shadow below it. Breathe out. She adjusted for the wind. She knew the range, 400 meters. Wait for the wind to settle. She let half her breath out and held, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of her rifle was sharp, violent. It echoed off the ridges, her own sound now joining the valley's symphony of death. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, a painful, reassuring thump. And then, silence. A silence even deeper, even more terrifying than before. Her shot was almost lost in the wind. No one was around to see it, no one to cheer. She lay there, not moving. Her heart pounded in her throat. Did she hit him? Or did she miss? Did she miss? And now he, a professional, knew exactly where she was. She waited. 1 minute. 2. A minute later, the front line fell strangely silent. The wind howled. But there was no return shot. No more bullets cracking overhead. The phantom was gone. She crawled back to the trench, her hands and feet numb, her body shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. The commander was at the bunker entrance, just checking his watch. He looked up at her. He didn't ask. He just listened to the silence. And he said, "The sound has stopped, which means you were successful."
Normally, a sniper's first kill is a defining moment, a moment of victory. But as Olga sat in the trench, trying to get her hands to stop shaking, she felt no sense of victory, no excitement, no pride. She only felt an icy, profound chill run down her spine. A coldness that had nothing to do with the snow, because in that moment, she knew she had just crossed a line. She had taken her mind, her knowledge of physics, her patience, and she had used it to end a human life from 400 meters away. She had crossed a boundary from which no one ever truly returns. That evening, she was called back to the command bunker. The men in the trench didn't look at her with mockery anymore. They looked at her with something else: awe and fear. The commander didn't give her a medal. There was no ceremony. He just pushed a long wooden crate toward her. From the armory, they said, "You'd know what to do with it." She opened it. Inside, nestled in oilcloth, was a brand new precision-milled rifle, a weapon reserved for the elite, a true sniper's tool. She looked up at the commander. He just gave her that same single nod. "From now on, you're no longer a trainee. You are one of us." That first mission, that first duel, it turned Olga Volkova from a potential sniper into a proven warrior. But it was only the smallest first test of what was to come. Because in the coming months, Olga would face battles that made even the most seasoned, hardened soldiers tremble in their boots. Part 4 brings us to the moment Olga stopped being just Volkova and started being called by a nickname, a name that both sides of the front would never, ever forget.
When Olga Volkova first set foot on the front line, she didn't look like a warrior. She was just a young woman, swallowed by a thick, heavy greatcoat, her deep brown eyes scanning everything, a mixture of high-strung alertness and quiet apprehension. The world around her was a symphony of dread. Distant artillery rumbled, a constant, angry thunder that you felt in your chest more than you heard with your ears. The frozen earth vibrated slightly under her boots. And the wind was a different kind of enemy. It was a bone-chilling gale coming straight down from the north, and it carried the stinging chemical smell of cordite and gunpowder, and something else, something metallic and raw. Everything about this place was testing her, asking the same question. Olga, do you actually have what it takes to survive here? For the first day, Olga was not given a sniper's mission. She was just another raw recruit. Her orders were to observe, to document, and to get used to the battlefield, just like everyone else. The veterans, men who had been living in these frozen ditches for months, looked at her with open skepticism. Their eyes were old, tired, and deeply suspicious. "A girl?" one of them muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. "Wonder if she can even handle the smell of blood," another spat near her feet. "We don't need a sharpshooter from some quiet forest range. This is war." Olga didn't answer them. She offered no defense, no justification. She just remained silent, her face impossible to read. And as she always did, she observed. She took out her old, worn leather notebook, the one from her physics classes, and she began to write. She recorded every detail: the direction of the wind, its speed at different times of the day, the exact position of the enemy's loopholes, the rhythm of their machine gun fire, the precise moment the sentries changed guard. She saw the patterns in the chaos, the things everyone else, in their exhaustion and fear, had long since stopped noticing. She saw all of it. That afternoon, a new, hostile enemy artillery battery began to find its range with terrifying, unusual accuracy. A shell screamed in, its whistle rising to a shriek, and exploded just yards from Olga's section of the trench. The world dissolved into a deafening crack, smoke, and pulverized ice. A cry went up, a high-pitched, terrible scream. A young soldier, barely older than her, was down. He was hit badly in the leg. His blood was a shocking, steaming hot red against the dirty white snow. It was the first time Olga had seen death this close, this immediate. She froze. For one long second, her heart seized in her chest. And then, as the other soldiers scrambled for better cover, shouting in panic, she moved toward him. She dropped to her knees, unslung her own scarf, and with firm, practiced hands, began to apply pressure to the wound, to stop the bleeding. Her hands, they weren't shaking. And that was the first moment her commander, watching from a few feet away, began to see her as something different. That night, a new problem. Recon patrols reported that the enemy had a sniper of their own, a new one, who had moved into a forward position. He was harassing the defense line, pinning down the new recruits, making it impossible for anyone to even lift their heads. This was a threat that had to be dealt with immediately. The commander scanned his small unit. He looked at his veterans, their faces grim. Then his eyes landed on Olga, who was quietly cleaning her rifle by the light of a single lantern. He nodded, once. "Volkova, you're with me." She didn't speak. She just slung her Mosin Nagant rifle over her shoulder, adjusted the strap, and followed him out into the cold. For the first time, she was being sent to do the one thing she had been trained for. They crawled, belly down in the snow, moving an inch at a time, up a small, exposed ridge. The snow was so deep and the night so quiet that any sudden move, any sound, would be a death sentence. The commander, lying flat beside her, pointed towards a dark mass of fallen trees, maybe 300 meters away. "He's there," the commander whispered, his breath pluming. "He's hit 3 of our men from that spot today." Olga said nothing. She eased her rifle forward. She settled into the snow, pushing the rifle's bipod into a small, stable mound. She pressed her cheek against the ice-cold wood of the stock, her eye finding the simple, crude, telescopic sight. There was wind. She could feel it on her right cheek. The bullet would drift. She would have to calculate for it. Olga took a long, slow breath and held it. Everything disappeared. The distant rumble of artillery, the cold, the commander lying next to her. It all just faded away. There was only her own heartbeat and the mist of her breath, and the problem in front of her.
And then a movement. So small, so slight. It was almost nothing. A helmet, just barely visible, rising from behind a broken log. The opportunity would last for maybe 2 seconds. Crack! The rifle's report was sharp, violent, and loud in the night. The scope jumped from the recoil. When her vision cleared, she saw it, even in the dim light. A dark shape, a shadow, just slumping forward and disappearing. The commander was staring at her, his eyes wide in the gloom. "Your first shot," he breathed, a note of pure, unfiltered shock in his voice. "Your first real shot, and you hit him." Olga didn't smile. There was no pride. She just pulled her notebook from her pocket, and in the dark added a single line. Day 1, 1 enemy sniper. News like that travels fast in a trench. The young, quiet, slender woman had just, with a single bullet, eliminated the ghost that had been terrorizing the entire company.
The eyes that had held so much skepticism that morning now held something new: respect. An old soldier, a man with a face like a worn-out boot, came over to her and placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Volkova," he said, his voice rough. Maybe you're the one who will help us survive this winter." That sentence stuck in her mind, not as praise, but as a heavy, terrible responsibility. Later that night, Olga sat alone in her makeshift tent. She opened her journal, trying to write, but her hand was shaking. Not from the cold, not from fatigue. It was the tremor of the reckoning, the realization of what she had just done. She had just placed the first milestone of her new life, the first time she had, deliberately and with perfect calculated skill, taken a human life. She didn't feel proud. She didn't feel regret. She just felt cold, and she asked herself, was it the right choice? And then she thought of her home, of the ash and snow where her village used to be. She thought of her parents who had vanished without a trace. She thought of the men in this trench, just boys really, caught in a war they never asked for. Olga picked up her pen and wrote, "I do not fight out of hatred. I fight for those who cannot protect themselves." And that was the night she truly grew up, in the way that only war can force upon the young. The next day, Olga Volkova was officially and permanently transferred to the company's sniper detachment. She was no longer the rookie on observation. She was now a critical part of the line, a guardian, a trusted asset given the sniper's highest, most sacred duty: protect her comrades at any cost. But Olga didn't know it yet. That first shot, that first kill, was just a door opening. It was the start of a long, dark, and brutal road. A road where every mistake would be paid for in blood. A road where her true talent was only just beginning.
After that first kill, Olga Volkova was no longer just an anonymous name on the company roster. She became a phenomenon. The quiet young soldier with the unearning gaze, the one who possessed an unexplainable, almost unnatural calm. But to become a true sniper, Olga had to learn more than just how to aim. She had to learn how to disappear. In her unit at the time, there were two men who were considered masters of the craft. The first was Ivan, nicknamed the Old Raven, a grizzled, tough-as-nails veteran who had, against all odds, survived 3 brutal winters on the front line. The second was Sokolov, a man whose hearing was so sharp it was rumored he could hear the sound of an enemy bolt action being chambered from 200 yards away. They were assigned to mentor Olga, and both of them were deeply skeptical that this quiet young woman could handle the pure psychological pressure of the sniper's war. Ivan, the Old Raven, told her flat out, his voice like gravel, "You can shoot. We've seen it. But sniping isn't a marksmanship competition. This is a game of patience and death." They began to teach her the rules, the real rules, the ones that weren't written in any training manual. Rule 1, you never fire twice from the same position. The first shot tells the enemy where you are. The second shot is when you die. Rule 2, you never shoot the first target you see. You wait, you watch. You shoot the officer, the medic, the man giving the orders. Rule 3, sometimes the most important shot is the one you don't take. Knowing when to stay silent is what saves your comrades. And the most important rule of all, a sniper must be a ghost. You see everything, and you are seen by no one. Olga's training started before the sun was even a rumor in the sky.
She would crawl into a snowdrift, hold her breath for minutes at a time, testing to see if an enemy spotter could see the tiny plume of vapor. She learned to cover her uniform in mud and slush to break up her silhouette, to become just another shadow in a landscape of shadows. The other soldiers would have seen this as torture, but for Olga, it was physics. It was a problem to be solved. She took out her notebook. While Ivan and Sokolov watched, baffled, she began to document everything. She wasn't just feeling the cold, she was analyzing it. She took notes on the refractive index of light on the snow at dawn versus dusk, knowing it could bend her aim. She recorded the difference in wind speed in a dense forest versus an open clearing. She memorized the sound of a boot stepping on hard-packed ice versus frozen mud. She timed down to the second the interval of the enemy's sentry rotation. It was this meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail that stunned her two mentors. Sokolov would later recount in a letter, "The girl, she doesn't just learn fast. She's finding things that even we never thought to look for. It's unsettling." After only 1 week of this intense personal training, Olga was given her first true sniper's mission. It was a test. A vital supply route was being harassed by an enemy sniper team. They were ambushing the food and ammunition sleds, and morale was about to break. This was a dangerous, high-stakes assignment. Many of the veteran soldiers were hesitant to take it, but she, the rookie, volunteered. Olga moved out alone, crawling through the deep snow, every movement as patient and deliberate as a hunting wolf. As she neared the suspected ambush zone, she spotted an anomaly. The snow on a small mound, it was settled unnaturally. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't windswept. It was packed. It was the telltale sign of a sniper's hide, a nest, dug the night before.
She didn't shoot. Ivan's words echoed in her head. Never shoot the first target. She lay in the freezing slush, 300 yards away, and she just watched. For 40 minutes, she didn't move. She didn't shiver. She didn't even blink more than was absolutely necessary. And then, she saw it. The muzzle of an enemy rifle, slowly, cautiously, pushing through the camouflage screen to check the supply route. She had him. She let her breath out and squeezed the trigger. One shot. A clean, perfect hit. The supply convoy passed through safely an hour later, and for the first time, her name was entered into the company's official after-action report. Volkova, -1 enemy sniper eliminated. No errors. Over time, Olga Volkova became the living nightmare of the enemy snipers on that front. She never spoke of her missions. She never bragged about her successes. She never, ever kept account of the men she shot. But her comrades, they counted. After every skirmish, the whispers grew. Volkova saved the whole platoon again. No one even saw where she went. She was just gone. It's like she disappears into the snow and then just appears exactly when you need her. No one knows exactly when the nickname started, but it stuck. The White Ghost. Maybe it was because of her small frame, which could hide perfectly in the smallest snowdrift. Maybe it was because the only sign she was even there was the sudden, sharp crack of a rifle and an enemy falling. One frozen February morning, the enemy launched a surprise assault on the eastern flank. A platoon of her comrades was caught in a crossfire, pinned down in the open. Casualties were mounting, fast. The commander needed to create an escape route. He needed to break the ambush. He grabbed his radio and yelled only one name. "Get me Volkova!" Olga was already moving. She crawled up a ridge, her scope sweeping the scattered trees in front of her. She didn't shoot at the regular soldiers. She didn't shoot at the men who were running. She searched for the conductor. And she found him, an officer, using hand signals, directing the flow of the entire attack. And just as he raised his hand to signal a new wave forward, crack! Her shot was perfect. It passed through the V of his raised fingers and struck him in the throat. He collapsed. The entire enemy attack dissolved into chaos, like a snake with its head cut off. The platoon below, the one that was trapped, they escaped.
Not a single one of them saw Olga fire. They just saw the enemy officer drop and the battlefield go silent. From that moment on, no one ever questioned the young woman from Arkhangelsk again. Her record grew. Her reputation spread. But the thing that changed the most was Olga herself. She was no longer the girl who froze at the smell of blood. Her face became calmer, her voice quieter. Every movement was deliberate, calculated. Her comrades still loved her, but many of them began to notice she was becoming a different kind of soldier. She was serene, almost frighteningly so. Her journal entry at the end of that week contained only 3 words: I am used to it. At 23 years old, Olga Volkova had become one of the deadliest and most effective snipers in her unit. She knew how to hide. She knew how to read the battlefield. She knew how to make the decision of life and death in a fraction of a second. But war never lets anyone savor a victory for long. And just ahead, a much darker chapter was waiting for her. A new enemy had arrived. A legendary sniper from the other side. A man whose own soldiers whispered his name in awe. A man they called the Night Wolf. He wasn't there to fight the platoon. He wasn't there to hit the supply lines. He was there to hunt her. And part 6 will begin the deadly duel between the 2 best snipers on the entire Northern Front.
By her 3rd month on the front lines, Olga Volkova had settled into a rhythm that was as terrifying as it was monotonous. The war had become a job, a grim routine of mechanics and physics. You watched until your eyes burned. You waited until your muscles screamed in protest against the frozen earth. You calculated wind, distance, and drop. You fired. You recorded the result. Then you cleaned your rifle and did it all over again. Olga had learned to tune out the constant low-frequency rumble of artillery on the horizon. She had learned to eat cold stew while looking at maps of kill zones. She had become a machine, efficient, lethal, and detached. But war has a way of punishing complacency. Just when you think you understand the rules of the game, the board flips. It started as a whisper. A rumor passed between shivering sentries over cigarettes in the dead of night. Then it became a murmur in the mess hall. Finally, it became a name spoken with genuine fear throughout the trench network. The Night Wolf. He was a ghost story made flesh. No one knew his face. No one had ever heard his voice. No one knew his real name. The only thing the soldiers knew for certain was that he had never failed. And now he was here. The nightmare began on a Tuesday morning that was colder than usual, the kind of cold that snaps tree branches and freezes breath into ice crystals instantly. The smoke from the field kitchens hadn't even cleared the tree line when the first shot cracked through the heavy air. A young communications runner, a boy no older than 19, carrying mail from the rear, dropped mid-stride. There was no scream, no flailing. He just hit the snow. The bullet had struck him dead center between the eyes. It was a shot of such terrifying precision that it sent a chill through everyone who saw it, a chill that had nothing to do with the winter wind. There was no follow-up shot, no chaotic machine gun fire, just silence. No one saw a muzzle flash, no one heard the bolt cycle, just the empty white void of the forest staring back at them. By noon, the sector commander had summoned the entire sniper detachment to the command bunker. The mood was suffocating. On the planning table lay a map of the sector, marred by 3 fresh red circles marking the positions where men had been killed in the last 72 hours. The commander, a man whose face was etched with the exhaustion of 1,000 sleepless nights, didn't waste time with pleasantries. He tapped the map with a dirty fingernail. "This isn't a stray shooter," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "And this isn't luck. This is the Night Wolf. Intelligence says he's been moved to our sector specifically to break our morale. He isn't here to take ground. He's here to hunt us. Specifically, he is here to hunt Volkova." The room went silent. Every eye turned to Olga. She stood in the corner, her arms crossed, her face impassive. She didn't speak. She simply gripped her leather notebook tighter, her knuckles turning white.
Later that afternoon, Olga requested permission to inspect the site where the runner had fallen. She didn't go to mourn, she went to work. While others saw a tragedy, Olga saw a crime scene full of data. She lay in the snow, looking at the angle of the body, the entry wound, and the terrain. Most soldiers missed the subtle details, but to a professional, the snow told a story. She realized immediately that all the recent victims had been shot from a reverse wind direction, meaning the sniper was shooting into the wind, masking the sound and complicating the ballistics. It was a show of arrogance and supreme skill. Furthermore, the trajectory indicated the shooter was low to the ground, likely firing from a prone position buried deep in the drift, not from a tree or a building. And perhaps most telling of all, there were no casings. Not a single brass shell had been found. This was the signature of a master. A chaotic shooter leaves a mess, a professional cleans up. He didn't make mistakes. He didn't leave traces. He didn't waste ammunition. And the most terrifying realization for Olga was that he understood the rules of this dark profession exactly the way she did. The days that followed turned into a psychological grinding match. The presence of the night wolf changed the behavior of the entire front. No one dared to raise their head above the parapet for more than a few seconds. The trenches became tunnels of fear. Every rustle of a dead leaf, every shift in the wind, every shadow that seemed to move in the corner of an eye felt like the precursor to death. Olga stopped sleeping. She existed on black coffee and adrenaline. Every night she crawled out into the no man's land, checking the lines, looking for the smallest anomaly. A patch of snow that was too smooth, a broken twig on a pine branch, an unnatural silence in a sector where birds usually sang. She was hunting a predator who was simultaneously hunting her. It was a war without gunfire, a cerebral battle of patience, geometry, and the paranoia that constantly prickled at the back of her neck. Then the inevitable tragedy struck. It happened on a Thursday afternoon as a light snow began to dust the battlefield. Olga was on patrol with Sokolov, her mentor. Sokolov was the man who had taught her everything, how to breathe, how to hide, how to survive. He was the closest thing she had to a father out here in the wilderness. They were moving toward a suspicious ridge near the pine forest when they spotted it, a helmet, lying carelessly on a tree stump. It looked like a mistake, a soldier leaving his gear behind, but to a sniper, it screamed, "Trap." Olga felt the surge of panic. She opened her mouth to whisper, "Teacher, don't get close, it's wrong." But the warning came a fraction of a second too late. The crack of the rifle was dry and sharp like a whip. Sokolov collapsed without a sound. He didn't groan, he didn't cry out, he simply fell forward into the snow. The bullet had passed directly through his left eye. It was a shot of such cruelty and precision that it felt like a message. The left eye was his shooting eye. The night wolf wasn't just killing him, he was making a statement. "I see you. I know who you are." Olga dropped flat, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it would break them. She lay there for an hour, pinned down, unable to move, staring at the body of the man who had taught her how to live. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. The shock was too absolute for tears. There was just a vast, painful hollowness expanding inside her chest. She knew it was him. Only the night wolf could make a shot that perfect, that cold. That night, Olga sat alone in the freezing command tent, guarding Sokolov's body before the burial detail arrived. The other soldiers gave her a wide berth. They didn't know what to say. They couldn't ask if she was okay, because the answer was obviously no. She opened her leather notebook. Her hand trembled, not from the cold, but from the rage simmering beneath her skin. She wrote in jagged, sharp letters, "He died protecting me. I will end this. Not for revenge, but because if I don't, he will kill everyone I know." She snapped the book shut. When she looked up, the change in her was physical. The last traces of the innocent girl from Arkhangelsk were gone. The hesitation of the rookie had evaporated. In its place was a steely, terrifying resolve. Her eyes had hardened into something ancient. She had acquired the 1,000-yard stare, that quiet, haunted look that war bestows upon those who have seen too much.
The next morning, Olga began to profile the night wolf. She approached him not as a monster, but as a math problem. She pulled every map, every casualty report, every weather log for the last week. She analyzed his firing angles, the time of day he preferred to shoot, and the types of targets he selected. What she found was chilling. He always aimed for the head. He always waited for the moment of maximum vulnerability, when a soldier was eating, reading a letter, or cleaning a weapon. But she also noticed something else, a strange anomaly in the data. He never fired when civilians were moving through the area. There had been opportunities, refugees moving on the road, villagers gathering wood, but he held his fire. He was a killer, yes, but he had a code. He was a man of principles, twisted though they might be. He wasn't a butcher. He was a soldier. He was a ghost who knew how to wait and knew how to think. He was, Olga realized with a shudder, a dark reflection of herself. He was what she could become if the war stripped away the last of her humanity. Deciding to force his hand, Olga set a trap. She knew she couldn't outshoot him in a fair fight, so she had to outsmart him. She constructed a decoy, a helmet raised on a stick just above the log line of a bunker, positioned to look like a weary sentry leaning against the wood. It was a classic trick, but she added a twist. She positioned herself not behind the decoy, but 50 yards to the flank, waiting for him to take the bait so she could catch his muzzle flash. She waited for 4 hours. The wind bit into her exposed skin, turning her fingers numb. She didn't move. The sun began to dip, casting long purple shadows across the snow. Silence. Just as the soldiers in the trench began to relax, thinking the wolf had moved on, a shot rang out. The helmet spun off the stick, drilled through the exact center. But the shot didn't come from the front, where Olga was aiming. It came from the side, from a steep, rocky outcrop that was supposed to be inaccessible. He hadn't just spotted the trap, he had anticipated where the sniper watching the trap would be, and he had moved to a position where he was safe from her counterfire. He had shot the decoy not because he was fooled, but to mock her, to show her that he knew exactly what she was doing. The commander looked at the hole in the helmet and turned pale. Volkova, he's as smart as you are. Olga looked at the distant rocks, her expression unreadable. No, she said softly, he's smarter. That evening, looking out over the darkening tree line, Olga understood the gravity of what lay ahead. This wasn't going to be a simple battle. This wasn't going to be over quickly. The night wolf wasn't just an enemy, he was her equal in every way. They were two predators circling each other in a shrinking cage. They both knew the terrain, they both knew the tactics, and they both knew that there was only one possible ending to the story. One of them would walk out of these woods. The other would become part of the frozen earth. As the sun finally vanished behind the pine forest, plunging the world into the gray twilight of winter, Olga opened her notebook for the last time that day. She wrote a single line, a promise to the ghost out in the dark. Tomorrow, I hunt him. The prelude was over. The contest between the two ghosts of the Northern Front had officially begun. The duel between Olga Volkova and the phantom known as the Night Wolf did not begin with the roar of artillery or the crack of a rifle. It began with silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that descended over Sector 7, stretching out for 3 agonizing days and 3 sleepless nights. For 72 hours, the war seemed to pause. No one was shot, no shadows moved in the tree line. There were no fresh tracks in the snow, no glint of optics in the sun, no sign that the enemy was even still there. The ordinary soldiers in the trenches began to relax, whispering that perhaps the German ace had moved on to hunting easier prey in the south. But Olga knew better. She could feel it in the marrow of her bones. He hadn't left. He was waiting. He was watching. The pine forest of the northern front, usually a place of serene, stark beauty where you could hear the soft hiss of falling snow, had transformed into a cathedral of fear. The stillness wasn't peaceful, it was predatory. Every soldier knew that a single misstep, a helmet raised an inch too high, or a cigarette lit in the dark, would result in immediate death. But while the others hunkered down, praying for the artillery to return and break the tension, Olga knew she had no choice. She had to go in. She entered the dead zone alone, crawling on her stomach across the white expanse. The cold was absolute, a physical weight that pressed the layers of her greatcoat against her skin. Icy powder worked its way down her collar, melting against her neck and trickling down her spine like freezing needles. Ice crystals clung to her eyelashes and matted her hair, turning her into a creature of the winter itself. Every movement was a calculated equation. She didn't just crawl, she flowed. She had to distribute her weight to avoid crunching through the crust of the snow. She had to time her movements with the gusts of wind to mask the sound of her gear dragging over the ice. She had to control her breathing, holding the vapor inside her burning lungs until the wind picked up enough to disperse the white plume that would give her away. This was no longer a military mission, it was a primal hunt, a game of survival played on a razor's edge. Near noon, with the sun casting long, deceptive shadows through the trees,
Olga saw something that made her freeze instantly. To an untrained eye, the patch of snow ahead was pristine. But Olga saw the anomaly. Between two birch saplings, glinting faintly only because the sun hit it at a precise angle, was a thin black line. It was a tripwire. It was incredibly fine, painted matte black to vanish against the dark bark of the trees, strung just inches above the ground. It wasn't a claymore or a grenade trap meant to blow the legs off an infantryman, it was a noise trap. A simple tension-based mechanism connected to a dry branch. If she had crawled 5 more centimeters, the wire would have snapped the branch. The crack would have been no louder than a breaking twig, but in this silence, it would have sounded like a gunshot. It would have told the night wolf exactly where to aim. Olga allowed a faint, grim smile to touch her chapped lips. Good, she thought. He is still here, and he respects me enough to build a trap specifically for a crawler. She lay motionless for nearly 10 minutes. She didn't shift her weight. She didn't push herself up to scan the horizon. She didn't move her eyes. She simply became a rock. A sniper of his caliber would be watching the trap, waiting for the target to spot it, panic, and look around for the shooter. That was the mistake everyone made. They looked for the hunter. Olga denied him that satisfaction. Instead, she let her peripheral vision dissect the environment. She scanned the trees, not looking for a man, but for the impact of a man on nature. And then she saw it. High up in a massive, ancient pine tree, about 400 yards away, there was a patch of snow on a thick branch. It was melting. The snow on the surrounding branches was powdery and dry, but this specific patch was glistening, turning to slush and dripping at a rate that didn't match the ambient temperature. Someone had breathed there, recently. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't on the ground. He wasn't in a dugout spider hole. He was in the trees. It was a suicidal position for most snipers. Once you shoot, you're trapped with no way to retreat, but it offered a commanding view. Olga whispered to herself, her voice barely a vibration in her throat. He's high up. That's how he killed Sokolov. The angle of the bullet that took her mentor's life hadn't made sense on the ground, but from a 40-foot elevation, the ballistics lined up perfectly. The wolf was arrogant, daring, and brilliant. She didn't raise her rifle. To lift her barrel now would be death. The movement would telegraph her position instantly. Instead, she began to build a 3D map in her mind. She calculated the downward angle of fire.
She estimated the crosswind, which would be stronger up in the canopy than down here on the forest floor. She analyzed the density of the pine needles he was using for cover. She slowed her heart rate, forcing her body into a state of near hibernation. Everything had to be precise. She closed her eyes for a second, visualizing the bullet's path. Then, with a sudden, jerky movement that went against every instinct she had, she shifted her body exactly 4 centimeters to the left. Crack! The sound of the shot arrived a split second after the impact. A 7.92 millimeter bullet slammed into the frozen earth, burying itself deep into the exact spot where her head had been resting a heartbeat ago. Snow exploded into her face.
He had been watching. He had anticipated her likely path, predicted where she would hold and fired at her suspected center of mass. He had guessed everything right, except for that 4-centimeter twitch. Olga didn't panic. She felt a surge of cold adrenaline. We are equals, she realized, but I can suffer longer than you can. She didn't return fire. Instead, she used the chaos of the snow cloud kicked up by his bullet to roll into a depression behind a thick root system. She began to move, crawling furiously now, circling wide to the flank, using the trunks of the pines as hard cover. The night wolf was moving too. Through the gaps in the trees, she saw the unnatural sway of branches. He was sliding down the trunk of the pine tree, abandoning his perch now that his position was compromised. He moved with terrifying speed, descending and vanishing into the undergrowth like smoke. The hunt had evolved. It was no longer a standoff. It was a chase. They moved through the forest in parallel, stalking one another in absolute silence. No more shots were fired. No commands were shouted. There was only the sound of blood rushing in Olga's ears and the terrifying crunch of snow beneath her own weight. They were 2 ghosts, circling in a tightening spiral, waiting for the other to make a mistake. Nearly 2 hours passed. The sun began to dip lower, casting the forest in a blood-red twilight. Then Olga saw him. It was just a shadow, a slight darkening behind the roots of a fallen oak tree. He was lying on his side, his rifle pulled tight into his shoulder and his eye pressed to the scope. He was waiting for her to cross a small clearing. But Olga possessed a gift that the wolf did not. She had the eyes of a physicist and the instincts of a forest hunter. She noticed the minute details, the way the fabric of a uniform didn't quite fold like tree bark, the way the negative space between the roots was occupied. She shifted her position, peering through a tiny gap in the foliage to get a better angle. Through her scope, the enemy came into sharp focus, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The night wolf was wearing a white camouflage smock, stained with mud and pine pitch. On the left arm, visible only because the sleeve had ridden up slightly, was a red band, the mark of a specialist, a high-ranking sniper of the Reich. But it wasn't the uniform that sent a chill down Olga's spine. It was the body. The figure was slight, the shoulders were narrow, the hands gripping the Mauser rifle were small and slender. This wasn't a man. Olga's lips moved silently. It's a woman. The realization rocked her. The night wolf, the monster who had terrorized the front, the ghost who had killed Sokolov, was a woman, a mirror image of herself, another girl from another village, perhaps thousands of miles away, whom the war had chewed up and spat out as a lethal weapon. They lay there, separated by 200 yards of killing ground. Both were aiming, both were holding their breath, both were waiting. It was a standoff of supreme tension. Whoever pulled the trigger first would reveal their exact position to the other. Whoever hesitated would die. Time stretched into infinity. The cold ceased to exist. The war ceased to exist. There was only the crosshair and the eye behind it. Then the wind shifted. It was a subtle change, a swirl of powder that moved from east to west. It was a distraction, a visual noise that lasted only for a fraction of a second. But it was enough.
Olga saw the night wolf flinch. The enemy sniper adjusted her rifle slightly to compensate for the wind, a micro-movement of the barrel. It was the mistake of a sniper who was too technical, too confident, reacting to the environment rather than the opponent. Olga didn't adjust. She had already factored the wind into her hold. She simply exhaled. Bang! The shot rang out, a thunderclap that shattered the stillness of the forest. The recoil slammed into Olga's shoulder, a familiar, violent kiss. Through the scope, she saw the black shape behind the oak tree jerk violently and then collapse. The enemy rifle slipped from limp fingers and fell into the snow. Olga didn't stand up. She didn't cheer. She lay there for another 30 seconds, cycling the bolt of her Mosin Nagant, waiting to see if it was a trick. But the figure in the snow remained still. Slowly, painfully, Olga stood up. Her joints cracked, and her muscles screamed as the adrenaline faded. She walked across the clearing, her rifle raised, approaching the fallen enemy. When she reached the body, she used the barrel of her rifle to gently lift the helmet. Olga found herself looking into a face that could have been her own. The German sniper was young, perhaps 22 or 23. She had pale skin and high cheekbones. Her eyes were wide open, staring up at the canopy of pine trees and the darkening sky. There was no hate in those eyes. There was no fear. The corners of the woman's mouth were turned up slightly, frozen in a faint, enigmatic expression. It looked like relief. It looked like acceptance. Olga dropped to her knees in the snow. The hate she had carried since Sokolov's death, the rage that had fueled her for days, evaporated instantly. In its place was a crushing, overwhelming sadness. She reached out and placed her hand on the dead woman's chest, feeling the warmth slowly fading away. "I'm sorry," Olga whispered in Russian, though she knew the woman couldn't hear her. "In another world, maybe we could have been friends. We could have discussed books. We could have walked in the woods without rifles." With trembling hands, Olga reached down and unpinned the red specialist band from the woman's uniform. She folded it carefully, treating it not like a trophy of war, but like a sacred relic. She placed it in her breast pocket, next to her notebook. She didn't take it to brag. She took it to remember. She took it because this woman had been the only person on earth who truly understood what it meant to be Olga Volkova. That evening, the official report was logged at headquarters. Volkova, Night Wolf, eliminated. The company erupted in celebration. Men cheered, clapping her on the back, pouring rations of vodka, and calling her a hero. The commander, beaming with relief, told her that she had saved them all. But Olga felt nothing. She sat in the corner of the warm dugout, staring into the fire. The applause sounded muffled, distant, like it was coming from underwater. She felt a profound emptiness, a hollow space in her soul that no metal could fill. She looked at the flames and asked herself the question that would haunt her for the rest of her life. How many more? How many more people like her and like me have to die before this madness ends? She knew that the greatest duel of her life was over. She had won. She was the best sniper on the Northern Front. But the war didn't care about duels. The war was a machine that demanded more fuel. And in the next part of her story, Olga would realize that the deadliest battles aren't fought with bullets. A new challenge was waiting for her, one that no amount of marksmanship could solve, and one that would test her humanity far more than the Night Wolf ever could.
When the war finally ended, when the smoke cleared and the parades began, Olga Volkova made a choice that baffled the generals and the politicians. She didn't step into the spotlight. She didn't stand on a podium to accept the medals that were waiting for her, nor did she drink to victory in the great halls of the capital. Instead, she chose silence. A silence as long, heavy, and profound as the winters in the Arkhangelsk village where she was born.
She requested an immediate discharge from the frontline combat units. She walked away from the frozen hell where she had survived through a combination of animal instinct, sharp intellect, and a pair of hands that had grown terrifyingly cold. But she didn't leave the military entirely. She couldn't. The war had changed her too deeply to ever return to a normal civilian life. Instead, Olga became an instructor. She was assigned to train the new generation of marksmen for the restructured armed forces. From day one, she refused the title of legend. If a young recruit, wide-eyed and eager, dared to whisper about her exploits or call her a hero, she would shut them down with a look that could freeze water. She had no interest in glory. Her motivation was far more pragmatic and deeply personal. She would tell her students, in a voice stripped of all emotion, "I am not here to make you famous. I am teaching you so that you survive." Her teaching methods were unorthodox. She ignored the standard military manuals, which she found rigid and theoretical. Her classroom was the outdoors, regardless of the weather. She taught them simple, brutal practicality. She taught them how to feel the wind, not just on their skin, but in their bones. She taught them how to dissolve into a landscape until they were nothing more than a trick of the light. She taught them how to lower their heart rate on command, how to slow their breathing until they were biologically invisible. These were lessons that couldn't be found in any textbook. These were secrets purchased with blood in the dead of night, learned in moments when death was less than a heartbeat away. Olga compiled this wisdom into a modest, handwritten notebook. It was about 120 pages long, bound in worn leather. It contained absolutely no politics, no patriotic slogans, and no military secrets. There was no classified information that would interest a spy. It was pure technique. It was a masterclass in physics and biology. The pages were filled with her neat, sharp handwriting, detailing the science of camouflage in sub-zero terrain. She wrote about how to walk so that the wind would bury your footprints within seconds. She explained how to select a firing position that wouldn't reflect the glare of the winter sun. She detailed how to survive psychologically when the world around you was nothing but a blinding, maddening white. Military experts who later saw the book referred to it grandly as a treatise on dissolution in snow. But Olga never used such fancy language. To her, it was simply my notes.
Over the decades, that notebook was copied, printed, and used to train generations of snipers. It became the foundational text for winter warfare tactics. Yet, in a final act of humility, Olga ensured her name never appeared on the official editions. Thousands of soldiers studied her words, owed their lives to her wisdom, and never knew who she was. According to the official military records, finally declassified years later, Olga Volkova's confirmed kill count stood at 251. It is a cold, hard number. Accurate. Terrifying. It places her in the pantheon of the deadliest marksmen in history. But on the rare occasions when someone brave enough asked her about that number, Olga would shake her head. "I don't remember the number," she would say softly. "I only remember the comrades I saved." And that was the truth of her service. While the world focused on her offensive capabilities, her true genius lay in defense. Through her counter-sniping tactics, her ability to read an ambush before it happened, and her uncanny skill at suppressing enemy fire, she had acted as an invisible shield. Hundreds of young men came home to their families because Olga Volkova was watching over them from the tree line. Olga lived out her final years in a small, nondescript wooden house near the edge of a forest, far away from the cities. She lived as she had fought, quietly. She rejected every request for an interview. She refused to appear at commemorative events. She never spoke of the war unless directly asked, and even then her answers were brief. She believed that fame and glory were dangerous because they sanitized the ugly reality of combat. "People like to remember the numbers," she once told a neighbor. "They like the score. But me, I remember the faces." She passed away in her sleep.
slipping out of the world as silently as she had moved through it. It was the exit she had always wanted. But her legacy didn't die with her. In the years that followed, stories began to surface from the men she had trained. They spoke of her with a reverence that had nothing to do with her kill count. They described a feeling that was hard to put into words. They said that when Olga stood behind them on the range, or when they knew she was overseeing an exercise, they felt a strange sense of peace. It was as if a blanket of white snow had been wrapped around them, insulating them from danger. One former student, now an old man himself, perhaps summed it up best at her small private funeral. He stood over her grave and said, "She didn't just teach us how to shoot. She taught us how to live." And that is the true legacy of Olga Volkova. It isn't the 251 confirmed kills. It isn't the 120-page manual that rewrote the rules of sniping. It is the fact that she took her own silence, her own trauma, and her own terrifying skills, and she transformed them into a lifeline for others. She didn't fight for glory. She fought so that others wouldn't have to die.
The war ended a lifetime ago. The relentless winds of the north have long since scrubbed Olga Volkova's footprints from the snow. Her rifle, once a terrified extension of her own body, is now just a piece of wood and steel, gathering dust in a quiet corner of a museum or a forgotten attic. The physical evidence of her existence has faded, reclaimed by the earth and the passage of time. But her story, that remains. It lives on, not in shouting headlines or marble statues, but in the quiet, persistent way truth often survives. It lives in the silence she cherished. And looking back at her long, incredible journey, the journey of a faceless, nameless shadow who asked for no glory, I realize that her true legacy isn't found in the medals she refused to wear or the cold statistics of a military record. Her legacy lies in what she left behind for us. Olga left us 3 timeless lessons, gifts of wisdom forged in the fire and ice of the hardest days imaginable. The first lesson is about the true nature of courage. Olga once told a trembling student, "I was afraid too, but I didn't let the fear decide for me." We often mistake courage for the absence of fear. We think the brave are those who charge into danger without a second thought. But Olga taught us the true courage is the exact opposite. Courage is being terrified. It is feeling your hands shake, feeling your heart hammer against your ribs, and your instinct screaming at you to run, and then taking the step anyway. Most of us will never lie in a frozen trench waiting for a sniper. But we face our own battles. We face the terror of a career change in our 40s, the heartbreak of a divorce, the crushing weight of financial failure, or the daunting diagnosis of a loved one. If a young girl from the snowy forests, with no advantages and no guarantee of survival, could stand firm against the storm of her era, then perhaps we, too, can find the strength to stand firm against the trials of ours. The second lesson is that true skill is for preservation, not destruction. Olga never took pride in the number of lives she took. She took pride in the number of lives she saved. The world we live in today doesn't have trench lines, but it is still a battlefield. We fight daily wars against pressure, chaos, despair, and a lack of direction. Olga teaches us that real competence isn't about dominating others or winning a competition. It isn't about being better than your neighbor. Real skill is about utility. It is about becoming strong enough, capable enough, and wise enough to be a shield for those around you. It is about using your talents, whatever they may be, to protect, to nurture, and to make life just a little bit more bearable for the people in your orbit. Olga's greatest achievement wasn't that she was a lethal weapon. It was that she used her lethality to preserve life. The third, and perhaps most powerful lesson, is the strength of humility. For her entire post-war life, Olga avoided the cameras. She rejected the titles. She refused to be called a hero. She lived simply like a woman with no past. And yet, It is precisely that humility that makes her name resonate so loudly today. We live in a noisy world. It is a world where everyone wants to be seen, heard, and acknowledged. We're obsessed with the attention, with likes, with viral fame. But Olga reminds us that sometimes the quietest people leave the deepest marks. Humility is a power that never goes out of style. It is not flashy, it doesn't scream for validation, but it is durable. It is real. If you have walked with me to the end of this story, I want to thank you. We didn't tell the story of Olga Volkova to glorify war. We didn't tell it to build a myth. We told it to remind ourselves that even in the darkest, coldest moments of history, there are always people who choose to be the light. And now, I want to extend an invitation to you. If you believe that stories like this, stories of quiet resilience and human spirit, deserve to be told and remembered, please let me know. Leave a light, share this with a friend who needs to hear it, or drop a comment below. If you want me to continue making documentaries like this, searching for the forgotten names of history, tell me with your own voice. And if you know of a story that is waiting to be uncovered, leave it in the comments. I will be listening. Thank you for taking this journey back to the snow with me. Thank you for visiting Olga.